Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Punt on the 42.e, brought to you in association with William Hill. This is the show where we preview the biggest sporting event of the month. And let's just call a spade to begin with. The Olympics is too big to cover in about 45 minutes, so we are going to turn our attention to the Lions. A very worthy second best, I think, this time around. Looking ahead to the Test series with South Africa. Delighted to be joined, firstly, by my colleague, a man of this parish, Ciaran Kennedy. How are you?
Very good, Gav. Enjoying the sun. Looking forward to chatting some Lions. Can't complain. All good.
Delighted to be joined as well by South African sports journalist of significant renown, Brenden Nel. And I think Ciaran will forgive me, Brenden, for being a little bit more concerned by how you are at the moment, given events in your country over the last few weeks. How attached to or detached from the unrest have you been? Has it affected you work-wise, personally, and how are things generally over there?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Great to be here. I suppose, firstly, like everybody the world over, the COVID pandemic has probably set us back a bit. We've been very slow with our vaccines. I've been lucky enough to get my first jab through the government program. So I'm halfway there. But I think for a lot of people, there's the slow rollout's a bit of a frustration. Obviously, we'd all like to get on with our lives, and this Lions tour is not exactly anywhere close to anything we used to. In terms of the unrest and that, I think when you grow up in South Africa, you almost get used to a certain amount of unrest. We coming through I was born still when it was apartheid. I grew up in that time, so you almost get used to that sort of thing. And there's always different levels. We always seem to be a country that's sort of standing on the edge of the precipice, and looking over the whole time and just keeping ourselves back. But I think this last week shocked everybody. We probably didn't expect it to get out of hand that quickly. It seems like the government's got it back in control. But I think we were all a bit shocked this last week.
In normal circumstances, to what extent does a Lions tour enter the mainstream consciousness in South Africa? And has that been diluted this time around, given the pandemic and some of the scenes and political unrest we've seen over the past few weeks?
I think normally the Lions tour would be front and center of everything that's going on. But I think there's so much else going on at the moment that people, your lives are so bombarded with other news stories and other things you've got to worry about, like COVID, like other problems in the country at the moment. That's probably not the same thing. And I think the fact that we don't have fans in stadiums makes a huge difference there. You get more of the water cooler talk, more of the banter between fans and friends. And I've covered 2 Lions tours before in my time, and I know that sea of red that you meet in this week before the test is out in the pubs, and that usually it's great. It's good to have a bit of banter with the guys and talk a bit of rugby and talk about memories of past battles. And it feels very different. We're sitting in my home. We're not getting close to the players. We're not getting close to the teams. It's very strange at the moment.
Was there much of a movement on the ground in South Africa, or I guess just in terms of general feeling, public feeling, that the tour going ahead was a bad idea, similar to what we've seen, say, in Tokyo with the Olympics? Or are people kind of embracing this distraction that it might become, given what's gone on recently?
I think if you're talking generally in terms of rugby fans, they welcome the distraction. I think we've got so much else over the last sort of 18 months that we've been dealing with in our lives, everybody personally, with the pandemic, that this distraction is great in a way. The disappointment's probably been that the provincial sides haven't been that good, and they haven't really put up much of a fight. So I think that's been the disappointment. But I think last week when we had the SAA game, you could feel the tension and the anticipation going up a notch. And I think this week it feels the same. There's always going to be people that maybe feel it shouldn't go ahead. I think it's understandable given where we are in the world at the moment. But I think it's an absolute miracle that it's got to this point and that the teams are so determined to see it through.
Ciaran, can I do a hype check with yourself? I'd imagine it took you a while to warm into the idea of the tour going ahead, but I guess that A game last week whet the appetite significantly and got people on this side of the pond on board a little bit more.
Yeah, similar to a lot of people, I think, really. I mean, I was certainly looking forward to the Lions tour, even though I did have reservations about whether it was a good idea or whether it was even realistic to get it played in South Africa. I certainly was looking forward to and enjoyed the opening match against Japan and Murrayfield. I mean, that was enough to kind of whet the appetite itself. But then once they got to South Africa and started, putting 30 or more points on the Sigma Lions, it didn't take too long for it to feel like this was all just a little bit of nothing, really. I mean, you didn't even have the kind of sense of occasion that, Brenden has touched on with the Sea of Red, or just, a hostile home crowd to kind of give the Lions that tour experience. And then when the games aren't competitive, it's just hard to buy into it. But yeah, the South Africa A game last week was, I suppose, better than we could have even realistically expected, because we didn't know where the Springboks were, and it was essentially the Springboks in disguise, of course. But they turned up and were at that pitch, and they brought that intensity and physicality. And watching that game, I mean, you couldn't not get excited for the Test series coming up, and you just feel like there is an actual, after everything that's gone on, we do have a competitive Test series on the horizon here, which is certainly looks like it's going to be competitive and going to be exciting. And yeah, the hype has grown significantly in the last week.
Brenden, we'll chat about that A game as a means of discussing what's to come in a moment. But could I ask you, in a broader context, in what regard is this Springboks team held by the public compared to some of the great teams of the past? So on this side of the world, I mean, all around the world, we really, that famous image of Francois Pienaar and Nelson Mandela and the sense of unification that World Cup victory in 95 brought, it probably lives on in mythology to a degree. It's obviously been immortalized in a different way in a pretty poor movie as well. But maybe there was a sense of it being ultimately false, that it didn't quite unite to the extent that has been made out to, say, the unacquainted or people who haven't read further into it in subsequent years. You had another team, obviously, in 2007 win the World Cup. But I think the sense within rugby, at least, was with this 2019 team under Rassie, with Sia Khaleesi being captain, that it was actually a more pertinent representation of the country. Is the country better represented by this squad? Like, is it a more accurate depiction of the country, and is it therefore held in greater acclaim?
Yeah, I think it's always a difficult one to. I'm never a big fan of comparing eras normally, because they all have their own sort of romanticism. But I mean, that 95, if I look at those teams, yeah, 95 was spectacular, not so much for the Springboks, but for the Mandela factor that we had there, where the country was at that stage. I wasn't writing rugby at that stage. I was still a journalist at a local paper, and I was in the stadium that day. It was an absolutely spine-tingling moment, that just given everything that had gone on in the country over the previous how many years, that we could get to that moment like that. But I think, like anything in any country, those moments are only great if you can carry them forward. And I think what happened after 95 is when the euphoria died down and we went back to our normal problems, you saw the gulf between people again. And I think there's a lot of factors. I mean, we don't have it. It's not a rugby show to go into those factors. But in 2007, I think it was different in a lot of ways. I was in France with the team. You felt a bit disconnected. I know it was celebrated here in South Africa, but not to the same extent as this team 2 years ago. I think a lot of that also is the romanticism around that is from that documentary they did, The Chasing the Sun. I'm not sure if it's shown over there by you guys, but those personal stories, especially the rags to riches tales of Sia Khaleesi, Makazole Mapimpi, those type of players has been captured so well. And the fact that they overcame the adversity of losing to the All Blacks, that they overcame their own demon in Japan, even though they were expected to win that game. All those sort of factors sort of built up. And I think, that aura is still there. The fact we haven't played rugby much, has probably helped that a lot, is that there hasn't been anybody to dent that sort of, bubble that Boks have lived in. And that might change this in the next couple of weeks. But, for now, this team is really seen as a team that encapsulates the country. And it's going to sound strange, because I always feel strange, explaining it to somebody from outside the country. But in South Africa, we've got we talk about different types of people of color. You have your black population, you have what we call the colored, which is a mixed race population in South Africa, and there's a feeling amongst, especially amongst politicians and people who sort of look at these things, that the team's more representative when there's more players, black African players as they call it. Now, if you look at the team that's been selected for Saturday, you've got a front row that's black African, which makes a difference to people as well. 90% of this country is technically, I suppose, black African. So and Makazole Mapimpi, guys like that who are in the team, they're heroes to a large part of this country that doesn't normally support rugby. And I think that's where it makes a huge difference this time around.
Oh, we appreciate you getting into it as well. I know it is a complex situation, particularly speaking to a couple of Irish lads. But you mentioned as well the fact that this aura has been sustained by South Africa not playing much rugby since 2019. We've heard a lot about that in the lead up to this tour, and suggestions both from South Africa and elsewhere that this Springboks team might be a little bit undercooked as a collective. Did that A game put that to bed to some degree, to your mind, in the sense that if either team looked undercooked physically, it was probably actually the Lions on the day?
Well, it's quite interesting. I think what's also helped with going into this test has been the sort of the phony war, the war of words between Russie and Warren Gatland, and the little barbs they have at each other, because both sides claiming that they got better out of that game. I think from the Springbok point of view, I would say what was good for them was the Lions looked human again. After playing the provincial opposition and putting 50 on them and scoring a plethora of tries, suddenly they looked like they could be rattled. And that was the first time we've seen that on this tour. And I think that from that point of view would have given the Boks hope that even though they've had COVID problems, even though they haven't played and players are out of form and things like that, they managed without 4 or 5 of their top guys to rattle the Lions, even if it was only for a half. The Lions are saying they finished stronger and etc. But he's chatting to the Boks personnel. They were really worried about match fitness in that game. So I'm not surprised that they feel that they don't worry too much that they faded near the end there. What was impressive for me was their defense, though, in that game when they were down to 13. That there was really a passion in the team that they didn't want to let tries in. And I think, to me, it's probably made Saturday's game even better now, because we'll know after Saturday who was probably talking the truth.
We will find out, Ciaran. I'm wondering, with yourself, as enjoyable as that game was, beforehand, did you have an interpretation or an impression as to how this tour might play out, given that South Africa would only have played one test in the interim since the World Cup final? And did that A game change that perception of yours?
Yeah, it's been a difficult one to kind of predict and, analyze in the lead up to the test series, because, it's normally the Lions where we're trying to figure out, combinations and what's the team and blah, blah, blah. But this time to be looking at the opposition and not really know, in a sense, what to expect from them, because we just haven't seen them play together as a unit for so long. So obviously you have doubts about, are they going to be up to it? Are they going to be the same force they were 2 years ago? All those type of questions. But I think once you saw that South Africa A team, you kind of realised that, well, look, these guys, they still have that intensity about them. They certainly looked, match ready. And the thing with the Springboks is they're not really a team that are going to do surprises. Like if they're on it, you know exactly what they're going to bring and you know exactly what you're going to face. And it's that kind of, just intense physicality. And as Brenden touched on, that incredible defensive work rate that they bring. And all those things are on show last week. And that was with a few key players still missing. So I guess looking towards the test series, you think that if they throw in a few more guys, which they have done this week, the likes of Mapimpi and Khaleesi, there's no reason to think that they can't just turn up and be that force that they were in 2019 again. So yeah, it has kind of changed my impression of this series in a sense that I probably had some concerns it wouldn't be as competitive as you would have hoped, but I certainly don't think that now. I think it's going to be a really tight series, and I don't think what am I trying to say here? I don't think there's going to be any surprises in the Springboks. I think we're going to see the Springboks we more or less saw in 2019.
Yeah, speaking of lack of surprises, Brenden, 21 of the 23 from the World Cup final involved this weekend, and probably the only difference, and it could be significant, is the fact that rather than a preferred 6-2 split on the bench, the Springboks have opted for a 5-3. Jack Nienaber has said that it's really due to a couple of individuals being undercooked or not getting the requisite game time in advance of that, so their hand has been kind of forced. Do you foresee that changing their plans in any way, particularly in the second half, when those subs will likely make their impact?
I'm not sure it's going to impact that much. I think the World Cup's a different thing, and it's a different tournament, and there was a build-up there. They don't have that build-up really now in this Test series. To me, what was interesting to me is the fact that they moved their team selection forward, and they 24 hours before they were supposed to, and they announced it. And that to me was almost a statement of intent from the Boks, saying that this is who we are. Come and beat us now. And it's interesting because we're sitting and we're debating all over the last couple of weeks. Have certain players got enough game time? Even after that A team game, there's South African journalists been talking about Trevor Nyakani's scrummaging, maybe not as powerful one. They're not playing Steven Kitsoff. And they've gone out. They said, well, we're selecting them again. We're selecting a 2-test prop in Oxen Chair as well to front up the Lions straight up. And Jacques Nienaber said it in his press conference. He says, well, our scrum coach, Don Heman, has got to fix it. That's his job. So to me, that's a very much a statement of intent from them and from in their team as well, that you're the guys, you got to go do it. It's up to them to come beat us on our home soil. So, that's interesting to me. I suppose we're going to see on Saturday who's right with these things. But, I like the confidence in that Boks side going into this game.
You've mentioned the front three a couple of times, and I saw you were writing in Supersport about the potency of the Springboks maul and it being part of a 3-pronged attack. We can get to those other 2 prongs in a moment, but can you talk us through just how effective you believe that maul to be from what you've seen even in that A game? Because as you wrote, it seems as though Maro Itoje is going to be absolutely instrumental if the Lions are to disassemble that maul. But it looks like he may struggle to do so given how effective it has been.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have these debates about the mauls every couple of Test seasons, and especially when we're playing in rugby championship and the Aussies are around and they absolutely hate the red ball. But we actually love it because anything South African rugby to do with physicality gets people's ears prickling, and they're pretty happy to see it. And South African teams, when they maul well, and we love doing mauls. So to me, if there's 2 things, if our front row stands up, and I know you say I've mentioned that quite a bit, but that was the crux of that World Cup. In that final, when they destroyed England's front row in those first couple of scrums, you knew which way the game was going to go. So to me, that's the one part. And if the maul gets going, the Boks will take confidence out of that. They'll almost lift every single spirit in the camp, and every player will grow an extra leg. They'll enjoy that. And they'll quite enjoy sapping the Lions' energy out of that. And I can see them trying that. And look, Alan Wynne-Jones is also pretty good at stopping mauls, and I'm sure the Lions would probably be pretty well versed in what the Springboks are going to do. I don't think we're going to see a running game from end to end. The other thing, though, we talk about those, the forwards. That's obviously the crux of any rugby battle. But the Boks also have those guys on the end, the small guys, the Cheslin Colbys, the Faf de Klerks, who can change a game very quickly. So, they're not as one-dimensional as everybody thinks, but we pretty do enjoy it when they are one-dimensional at times.
Well, I think they're one-dimensional in the sense that they're good at everything, Ciaran, which is the frightening thing, and there aren't many wrinkles purely because they're pretty spotless in all aspects of the game. Just sticking with the rolling maul for a moment, how big a concern will that be for Gatland and his crew based on what we've seen, I suppose most partly in that A game, do you reckon?
Yeah, of course it will be. But I also think I know there's been a bit of concern about the Lions pack, but, when you look at that pack on paper, they're all quality players who are well able to maul and are well able to roll their sleeves up. The only concern you would have from a Lions perspective is maybe that a lot of these combinations, I think I'm right in saying the centre combination for this Saturday is the only one that have actually had meaningful time together in the warm-up games. So we don't really know what this Lions pack looks like as a unit. But I wouldn't be too concerned about how they're going to handle the South African maul. Obviously, you would back the Springboks in terms of their power and their skill. it's an obvious area of strength for them, but I don't think it's something where the Lions are going to be absolutely, obliterated at. I think there's players there who are more than capable of handling what's coming this week. And it's also something that, has been at the forefront of Gatland's mind for the last weeks. And he's picked these players with that in mind. And, it's one of the areas that have been absolutely drilling into these players over the last couple of weeks. So yeah, I don't think it's where the game will be won or lost, put it that way.
Brenden, when we talk about the other two prongs to South Africa's attack, and say even some of those beautiful set play scores that South Africa managed in the World Cup, we saw one example I recalled of Rassie reaching back and kind of high-fiving Felix Jones, and it was clearly a chink in the opposition's armour that they had spotted. Was that against Japan? I'm not sure. But with a team like the Lions, where it is kind of a hastily-ish assembled group of players who don't necessarily have that chemistry in combinations, as Ciaran is saying there, do you think those little chinks in the armour are a little bit more readily identifiable for a coaching staff as astute as Jacques Nienaber, Rassie and co?
Yeah, I think. Coaches will probably tell you that they don't worry that much about the opposition, and they rather try and impose their own game plan. And they're all lying, of course, because they all do worry about the opposition, these type of things. But I think the one advantage the Boks do have there is that even though they haven't played for 2 years, the Kanye Am and Damien Delende in the midfield, their backline is the same one that won the World Cup. There's an immense amount of continuity and confidence they take from that. And you've got to ask yourself, is the 4 or 5 games that this Lions team has played enough to gel them as a unit? And they haven't played as a test team. So, I think the Boks will definitely be looking at it. As individuals, you guys are right. They're exceptional players, all of them individually. The big thing is how quickly can they gel themselves together, and how, when the chips are down, and anybody who's played rugby when you look to your mate next to you and you know what he's going to do, is there going to be that in the Lions team? Of course, we obviously, we're not close enough to the side at the moment on this tour to see how those relationships are and how they've been developing. But that's going to be a real question.
Looking at the Lions team, Ciaran, what was your immediate reaction to seeing the team named, be it in the Times about 3 weeks ago or when it was officially announced this morning? And can you talk us through as well, I guess, your impressions of the Irish inclusions and exclusions? Massive for Jack Conan, considering the couple of years he's had. You'd say then Ian Henderson is extremely unfortunate, and we can get on to Conor Murray and Ali Price in a moment.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with this Lions selection is that compared to previous tours, there hasn't been a general consensus on this is what the Lions team is going to look like. And even over the last few weeks, if you look through different, predicted or favoured starting 15s, I think you saw a lot of variation across the board, really. And some of that is down to the fact that you would have to say the Four Nations, there hasn't been a standout nation as well coming into this. It's not like you're coming in with a hugely powerful England team or an Ireland team that have had a great run of form. So, it was a bit more open than usual. In terms of surprises, Ali Price, as you mentioned, is the obvious one, which we'll get to. But otherwise, there was nothing there that really jumped off the page to me and shocked me, I have to say. I think a lot of those players have played themselves into form over the last few weeks and have kind of played themselves into the team. Van der Merwe is maybe one I thought was lucky ahead of Josh Adams, because I know we've touched on the quality of opposition hasn't been great in the warm-up games, but Josh Adams he couldn't have really done much more, bar not having the best game last Saturday. Anthony Watson, Stuart Hogg, I think they're both kind of safe bets. I like Elliot Daly at 13 beside Robbie Henshaw. I think if you're going to beat the Springboks, you can't just try and match them in terms of physicality. They're going to have to try get inventive. They're going to have to try be creative and, have a few tricks up their sleeves. And I think Daly just gives you that little bit of extra creativity in midfield. Dan Bigger, I don't think was a surprise to anybody. And then, in the pack, you touched on Tyg Byrne, so maybe we'll start there, and Ian Henderson. Tyg Byrne on the bench, a lot of people wanted him in the starting team, obviously, but he's just such almost like a safety blanket on the bench in the fact that he covers a couple of positions and he's been in great form. And, a player, if we all think this is going to be a reasonably tight game, someone like Tyg Byrne coming in the last 20 minutes to just cause a bit of hassle around the breakdown, get a few turnovers, I mean, he's not starting, but he could have a huge say in how this game pans out still. In terms of the starting Irish players, and just on that, I mean, I think that's why Ian Henderson misses out. If one of those players is on the bench, you kind of can't have two of them, I think. Robbie Henshaw was an absolute shoe-in, I think, at centre, even though he's had his hamstring injury. We're talking about one of the form centres in World Rugby over the last year. He has that physicality that will be needed, but he also brings a bit of creative spark. And I mean, he's spoken about how much he's worked on his footwork over lockdown, and he's a centre who can also provide the type of X factor we're used to seeing from wingers. You know, you think of that try he scored against France last autumn, and the little burst of speed and offload against Wales, wasn't it, in the Six Nations? So he just brings so many threats from centre. Tyke Furlong, again, you know, nobody was surprised there. He was probably the one safe bet in the entire team, really. And then Jack Conan, yeah. What can you say? Like, what a couple of weeks or what a year it's been for him. I mean, to think that he hadn't played a test game in, 18 months, as recently as February. But again, he brings that kind of dynamism that Gatland, I think, is looking for in his team. He's aggressive, he's a good defender, but he also has handling skills, and, you know, he's got a decent turn of pace for a fella of his size. And he just brings that little bit of the unknown again. He's not a one-dimensional player, which, you know, you could argue some of these back rows in the Lions squad are. And yeah, he's also proven himself to be a good decision maker under pressure. And you don't want to think that anybody has played themselves into a team based on one game, but I think Conan's performance against England in the Six Nations left such a lasting impression on Gatland. I mean, he's kind of spoken about it anyway, but even that try that he helped set up for Keith Earls, the fact that he had to, you know, improvise a bit, and that was more off the cuff than people maybe thought it was. He's able to handle pressure situations. He's a good decision maker, and he's been in superb form. You'd have to say his selection there is warranted. And Conor Murray not making the team is maybe being seen as an anti-Irish selection, but the fact that Conan is in ahead of someone like Faletau, who you would consider to be one of Gatland's boys, is proof that, you know, Gatland is picking a team that he thinks is the best team to beat the Springboks. There's no bias in any of these calls. And yeah, I think the Irish players there, it's hard to argue against any of them being included.
What about your own impressions of the team, Brenden, when you saw it announced? Was there any names that did jump off the page to you? Were you surprised, for example, by Conan starting? Because we're all made up for him here, and at the same time, we're probably viewing it through green-tinted glasses as well. We've seen him perform week in, week out very impressively.
Yeah, I don't think I was surprised. I think I would have been surprised if he wasn't picked. I think he's definitely a much more versatile eighth than the other eights in the squad as such. And yeah, he's a type of player that can hurt the Springboks. He's very different to what they've faced before. Yeah, and I wasn't surprised with the rest of the although Courtney Laws there tells me that that's a physicality pick there to bring him in. I was surprised at Ian Henderson, but I suppose with Alan Wynne-Jones coming back in, somebody's going to pay the price as such. I'm a big Conor Murray fan. He plays very much a South African type of nine role with his box kicking, and that to me is more a form pick there at Eddie Price. And it tells me with Elliot Daly that they are going to try and move the Springboks around. Elliot Daly in 2018 when England toured South Africa was one of the players that really gave the Boks a lot of trouble in that series, and I think he scored quite a few tries in that series as well. And so he's the type of guy that can trouble the Boks, and it's going to be interesting. Duan van der Merwe, I think that's more a romantic choice for him. I think he's been in great form. I feel for Josh Adams, but I think he's going to get quite a warm welcome from the South Africans. The South Africans will quite enjoy the fact. Yeah, we tend to be. Yeah, if we see physicality, we almost run towards the fire than run away from the fire. So they'll quite enjoy that. And it's going to be fascinating to see Cheslin Colby because, while he's not scared to tackle, I think Duan might have some problems on defence. Yeah, well, most players in world rugby have problems on defence, Cheslin Colby. So it's going to be interesting to see how he handles it.
Yeah, it is. I know they're both South Africans, but it is a complete clash of cultures really on that flank, isn't it? Excuse me. Can I ask you, Brenden, just to, I guess, delve into the Conor Murray omission, if you like, for a moment. Now, granted, he's probably going to play 25 minutes or half an hour with the game, hopefully still in the melting pot from a neutral's point of view, or I guess from both teams' point of view. If you're going into the last half an hour and it's on the line, you're probably happy enough. But you say he's a kind of a South African type of scrum half, and I'd agree. But what kind of a scrum half would South Africa rather play against at the moment, do you think? And is Ali Price a little bit more of a wild card where, as much as there's loads known about him, I'm sure the guys will have done a huge amount of research on him. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult to telegraph what he can actually do. And when you look at that Lions squad, including Van der Merwe, it is quite a physical type of side. Maybe you need that kind of a wrinkle, that little element of unpredictability that Price can bring.
Well, yeah, and I think he's had a good tour. I mean, he's probably been, he stood out on this tour, and he had a great game against the Stormers as well. To me, I like Connor because, I mean, I live in Pretoria. I've grown up with the Fourie du Preez of this world, and he reminds me very much, not just on his kicking. I know we always focus on his box kicking, but he's the type of player, and what made Fourie du Preez great for me was he was that type of player that off the base on attack, could shoot that pass out maybe second or third channel, but just pick the right guy where the defense isn't. And Connor does that very well as well. Ali Price is a lot more unpredictable. I think the Boks probably would have expected to play Connor over there. So, and in that back line, it's going to be interesting to see how they structure that attack. They're all physical guys, but that unpredictability is going to add an extra dimension to this game.
Ciaran, what do you make of that selection if you take off the green tinted glasses? I mean, you don't have them anyway. You're an objective journalist, right? But I'm not. So I'm gutted for Conor on a kind of a personal level and as a Munster man. Do you agree with this based on what you were saying earlier, even in the sense that Price has played well, but against opposition that have shipped an enormous number of scores? So listen, we're not privy as well to what's going on in the training pitch. Like Gatland is watching them every day. He's made a choice, but stylistically looking at this game and looking at the opposition, if you had the coach's hat on, who are you picking there?
Yeah, I think it's a brave call and a call I would not be brave enough to make. As we say, Price has looked good in these warm-up games, but it's one thing to do it in those warm-up games where, his forwards have been totally dominant and he's had kind of time and space to make the decisions, things like that. It's another thing to do it against the Springboks. And Ali Price, I know he's got 40 plus caps for Scotland, but he doesn't actually have a huge amount of experience playing against these big Southern Hemisphere sides. I can see the logic in it. Gatland clearly wants the Lions to be able to play with a bit of pace, move the point of attack. And Price is more, he does bring that unpredictability, and the Springboks are going to have it. As you mentioned, it's not quite as telegraphed. He's got that sniping game that Murray used to have. He can spread it wide, he can box kick, he can chip, he can do all those things, but you don't necessarily know what he's going to do each time. Murray is, I don't want to be critical of Conor Murray, but he is a little bit more predictable in what you're going to get from him. And not that that's necessarily a bad thing. There's a time and a place for it. And I've been trying to kind of see the sense in Gatland's decision here. And I think if it all comes down to if Price rises to the occasion, if Price plays the way he's been playing in the warm-up games, it's going to look like a great call because he's going to give the Lions exactly what they need to beat the Springboks, I think, which is that tempo and that little bit of creativity and that little bit of spark. If he doesn't rise to the occasion, obviously it's going to look like a terrible call because you've left your most experienced scrum half on the bench and a guy who's been there and done it. Another way of looking at it is Gatland now, if we presume this is going to be a tight game heading into the last 20, 25 minutes, Gatland now has his most experienced halfback pairing on the bench ready to come in and see out those championship minutes, if you want to call them that, in terms of Conor Murray and Owen Farrell. And that's a pretty nice way to be. And that's something that the Boks don't really have. Those two guys can come in and they know how to see out games like this and they can bring that control. But of course, if that's gonna happen, you have to be in the game in the first place. I think Price is a huge call. I can totally see the logic in it from Gatland's point of view, but I'd be very wary of it, and I would have concerns for it. I don't think he's as good a defender for a start as Conor Murray, although he's defended well on this tour, but again against questionable opposition. Mm. And there's lots of areas where you can just be concerned: is Price going to be the man for the job? But yeah, like I say, if he plays the way he's played in the warm-up games, there's no reason this can't look like an inspired Gatland choice, but it wouldn't have been the choice I made.
Maybe if the game was played at altitude, Brenden, and Conor Murray was bombing those box kicks into the stratosphere, it might have been more so a game for him. Have you given any real thought to the fact that the game is going to be played now, or sorry, all 3 tests will be played in Cape Town at sea level? Does that actually really relieve South Africa of an advantage, or is there a little bit too much being made of that over here, do you reckon?
I think just one thing on Eddie Price before I answer that. It's quite interesting if you contrast what the Springboks have at halfback, because Eddie Price is unpredictable, but he's playing against Faf de Klerk, and he hasn't played against a scrum half on this tour that's quite like Faf de Klerk in terms of that. The contrast to that is that the Boks scrum half on the bench, Herschel Yankees, is very much an unpredictable type player as well. He hasn't had the greatest season. Some of us feel that he's quite lucky to be in the team at the moment, especially ahead of Kobus Reinach, who's really had a great season as well. And we were quite surprised at that. And he's a youngster as well, so he's really he came through in 2019 just before the World Cup at the right time. But he hasn't really recaptured that form as well. So it's just going to be interesting to see how that contrast plays out. So I just thought I'd mention that. Just on the altitude. To me, I think there's been too much made of it, because I think the way the Lions structured this tour to play the first test down at sea level, probably negated that to a bit, because both sides have been in Cape Town now for a couple of weeks now. They both were going to go back up to altitude again. So your fitness levels that you came into this tour with are probably more a factor than going up and down from altitude. I think the Lions have probably got a little bit of an advantage of this coming in from their Jersey camp and training at altitude and coming through where the Boks have had their COVID problems. So I think that's probably going to help the Lions as well. So I don't think it's been made too much. I think the one thing that nobody's mentioned that could come into the picture though is that Cape Town in winter is very much almost it's not the rest of South Africa in winter. Up here in Pretoria and Johannesburg where I am, it's dry. It's cold, and it's a very dry cold, whereas Cape Town goes through a rainy season in winter. So we could have mud patches in those games if going ahead. And I know it's raining in Cape Town today quite heavily as well. So that might change the complexion of the game in another way that nobody's even thought about, and it might become a very, very big arm wrestle. And I think that would probably favour the Boks if that happens.
It certainly would. Yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on the weather forecast from over here. Ciaran, let's start winding down and looking at what you expect to happen over the coming weeks. Let's start with Saturday to begin with. Looking at those two teams, listening to Brenden and his quiet confidence, and I guess your gut feeling, Ciaran. Give us an idea in your head. It could be totally wrong as it transpires, just like Gatland picking Price. But if you're right, you're going to look like a genius. So give us an idea how it's going to play out in Cape Town this weekend to begin with.
Okay, well, I've kind of been tossing this over in my head the last couple of days, and yeah, I'm going with the Boks to win the first test. I think South Africa looked strong enough, and you certainly looked sharp enough last week to suggest that they're really going to be on it this weekend. And as we touched on earlier, there's so many combinations there in that Lions team that we haven't seen before, and there's a few question marks over a few players, I'd say. So I'm going for the Boks to win the first test, but I think the Lions will win the series. I'm going to go for the Lions to win the next two games. I think we've seen a lot of disruption already. And I think if it goes into a case of, either both squads having to kind of dip into their squads a little bit deeper over the next two games, I would think the Lions have stronger squads to survive losing a couple of players to, whether it be injuries or COVID or close contacts or anything like that. So yeah, I'm going to go for I'll put a score on it. I'll go 23-20 to the Boks this week and 2-1 to the Lions overall. Beautiful.
It's a bold call, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. It's interesting, Brenden. Ciaran is picking the Boks to win this weekend, and this show is brought to you in association with William Hill. Looking at the odds on their website, South Africa are actually underdogs for this first test slightly. I mean, they're 11-10, whereas the Lions are 6-5 on. And I'm kind of wondering from where are William Hill and the bookmakers drawing this confidence, if you know what I mean? Because the only sort of sample resembling what we're going to see this weekend that we've seen, the Boks won, and they were missing this, let's say, the same number of key players as this Lions test team. So I'm just wondering where it flipped in their minds. I don't know if it's a rhetorical question, I guess. Like, you probably can't answer it, but can I get your answer as to how you see it going over Saturday and the coming weeks?
It's quite interesting, because I think very much like Ciaran says there, I'm probably the opposite. I've called it before. I've been asked on radio also as well about my prediction, and I've called it exactly the opposite: Lions to win the first test, but the Boks to win the next two. And I think part of that is this is such a strange tour. It's so difficult to actually, just get a hold on who's the better side going in. Both teams have got big question marks about them, and my call would be because the Springboks, I feel, may be a bit underdone, that they'll be good to front up for 60, 70 minutes, but I think those last 15, 20 minutes are what's going to decide this test match. It happened in 2009 as well. They managed to hold out in that first test as well. I think it's going to be incredibly close series either way. And I do agree with Ciaran that the Boks are probably not in the best shape in terms of their depth at the moment. There's players, to me, one player just springs to mind that's not even close to the Boks team at the moment is Marcel Coetzee. I mean, there's a guy who could come in from the outside. We saw on Saturday Johan Goosen, who's just come back from Montpellier as well. There's another guy who could come into the Boks side. They're definitely players they can bring in. Obviously, the bigger squad has been more about squad development because there's 12 tests this year. But I think for now, the Lions are probably added an advantage in terms of depth. The Boks will be there physically. I think they'll front up for 60, 70 minutes. But depending on what the scoreline is in those 70 minutes, I think they might just fade in this first test. But saying that, give them an extra game together, I think they'll be roaring back to the second test. So it's exactly the opposite of what Ciaran says. I suppose that's what makes it so fascinating this weekend.
I love it. I know the odds as well are not arbitrary. Like, it is determined as well by people actually putting money on it. I guess I'm wondering not so much where William Hill are getting their confidence from, but fans over on this side of the pond. One last one for you, Brenden, if you don't mind. So we know which way you believe the series is going to go, but could I get like a comparison of your confidence ahead of this series versus, say, 2009 and versus 97, going into those series as well, where each time I'm sure South Africa would have been confident of victory? How confident were you then versus this time around?
I think each time the Boks have come into this series as world champions, so it's been difficult. I think in 97, maybe being a bit more naive, I believe the Boks were in a much better space, and I felt team selections in 97 probably hampered them in terms of not picking a goal kicker, especially in that second test where they scored 3 tries to 0 and still lost the test through the Gasco drop goal. In 2009, I was also, I won't say as confident, but that 2009 team was a special Springbok team, and I think it was probably a lot stronger man for man than this team. They went on to beat the All Blacks 3 times in the season, which hasn't happened for a long time to any All Black team. So, and it just showed that Lions team to me was probably stronger than this Lions team as well. But the one thing these series teach me is that unpredictability of a Lions series, and there's players you never. I just think of a guy like Tom Smith in 97, who we never thought of would have been a Lions hero, Matt Dawson. Guys like that who come through and just show us that when the chips are down, they put their hands up. And I think that's where it's going to come through in this one. It's a tough series to call. This is definitely not a type of tour. I've done many tours in my life. This is the strangest of them all, and it's been the strangest one to call, because I think even in terms of team selection in the Lions, I think probably every single pundit probably got it wrong today as well. So I don't know. I'm just looking forward to the game. I think it's going to be exciting. It's going to be nail biting, and I'm actually hoping that it comes down to those last 5 minutes in the third test, and hopefully we don't have a red card from either team, that we can get through this test, that we don't have other talking points.
Well, I think we can echo that. Brenden Nel, thanks a million. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, guys. Anytime.
Ciaran, thank you to you as well. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. The hype has risen again this week for me now.
Unreal. Thank you to everybody at home as well. This has been The Punt, brought to you in association with William Hill. Remember to gamble responsibly. mind yourselves, enjoy it over the weekend. We'll catch you very soon. Until then, take it easy.